So welcome to this evening's presentation, Living Between Two Countries, our US-Australia Experience, Part 5. Here we are, 15 months, 16 months even, into this experience, and I would love to share with you some of the reflections and developments that have occurred over this time. So just one thing to note, of course, that this does not constitute personal, financial, tax, or investment advice. You'd be well advised to go consult your own tax and or financial advisor, given your circumstances. And we believe all material quoted here to come from reliable sources. But again, refer back to disclosure number 1. Please keep in mind, I have a YouTube channel. I'd encourage, if these are topics of interest to you, I'd encourage you to subscribe to that channel. I'm pleased to say that last month's presentation, the case study in stock awards and taxation across borders, is up, so you can see that. Typically, these presentations tend to be of a more technical nature, but every now and again, I like to throw in a personal story, and that's what we have here this month. So a little bit about me. I'm a tri-citizen born in the UK, raised in Australia, and an American citizen from an American mother. A little bit more about me right there. I've been a financial advisor for the past 12 years. I've won a number of awards. I've been a keynote conference speaker in a variety of places and got the Global Financial Planning Institute started, where we have over 300 advisors that I train in working with clients across borders, because what I found when I moved to the US was that there is nothing for how to help us globally mobile folks that want to know about these kinds of issues. Here are some examples of the kinds of clients that we work with, be that Americans in Australia or Australians in America. And with that, let me get to the heart of today's presentation. So we're going to provide a background as to where we are in this trip, what's happened, what's changed. We'll talk about education. Liza will be just providing a little bit of background there on the education and property management. I'll be talking about running a business between Australia and the US and various other tips, as you can see here. Towards the end of the presentation, I will get into a slightly technical topic, but it is relevant to tonight's presentation, and that's talking about tax residency and an opportunity that can exist for dual citizens. Okay, so with that, maybe Liza, seeing as it's your picture here, you might like to run us through the background of what we've been doing.
Okay, so we had lived in the US for several years. We met in the US, and we lived in Minneapolis starting in 2014 until January 2021, and decided it might be a good time to try living in Australia. So we left in January 2021, which was about a 6-month preparation process.
What did we do in the 6 months to prepare?
Oh God, everything. I think the big things were to figure out my visa stuff and get citizenship for the children, which in the middle of COVID, had layers of complexity. And then, I'll figure out what to do with our house in the US, figure out how to get a house or a place to live in Australia, figure out schools for the kids. We have 2 small children, etc. So we did it was a crazy time to be moving. And so we had to do the quarantine for 2 weeks in Queensland. And then we ended up in Brisbane, where Ashley grew up. And I had gotten the kids enrolled before we left the US. I knew where they were going to be going to school and everything, and gone through that process, and commenced our life. And we had sort of decided the original commitment was going to be to August 2022 and sort of reevaluate as we went along.
So 15 months in, where are we and what's going on?
So, we decided, the first time we could travel was starting as of this last January. And I was very keen, and we were all very keen to be able to see family back in the US. So we planned a trip here. We're here for 3 months. And we've revised our plan to extend it for a year, and we're planning on staying in Australia till August 2023.
With another trip back in December of 22. And that's because we just love extreme weather. So if we can if we can hunt out super hot or cold, then we'll take that. All right. So education. This is has been more in Liza's domain. So I'll let you talk about these particular bullet points and what comes to mind when you read that.
Well, I think one of the main challenges, because I think for us as a family, our struggle is what we kind of want to be in both places. And so the school year in Australia is more of a, consistency year-round calendar year. It doesn't provide for any really, really long break. The longest break in the Australian school system is about 6 weeks. And then the US system is different, where it's school for 9 months and break for 3 months. So while we're in Australia, given that we want to have, we have a lot of family here in the US, and we don't want ourselves or the children to be deprived of those relationships, we have decided to take off a term. So those of you who grew up or know the Australian school system, it's divided into 4 terms. And we've taken off, basically taken off term 2, which we had to get, approved by the principal, and there's a whole process for that. And that's fine. While the children are young, we have a child who's in grade 1 and a child who is in kindy. So she's not even in grade school yet. So we're homeschooling. I'm homeschooling the older one who's in grade 1, which is turning out fine. But I was pretty nervous about it. And, I just had to navigate that with the school in Brisbane. So we're homeschooling for now. And then when we come back over the holidays, of course, school won't be going on in Australia, so we won't have to homeschool. And I think at an emotional level, it's been easier for us. I think the kids, they're little, and I think they're a little confused about, they miss their friends in Australia, but they're very happy to see family here. So there's a little bit of navigating their emotional adjustment. That's about it. I don't know. Do you have any other thoughts about that?
So Brian has chatted in. He'd be interested in seeing this video. So this is more. It's really funny. Just actually, I do have a comment, and that is, I've been eager to check in with my kids about how they're feeling. What are they missing? Who are they missing? Will they miss life back in Australia or in the US? And I think the simple conclusion is, and perhaps parents older than myself who've been through this before might know this already, but they're simply too young to know. They cannot answer the question in any reliable way. And so it's been interesting to see them reflect in a way that is not surprising to an adult, but is surprising to them. And so for that reason, it's dawned upon us that our older daughter is missing her classmates. So I had the idea, let's do what we did in COVID, and let's do what we did during lockdown, and we'll make a little video, pull out our iPhone, and we'll show the highlights of what life is like here in the US, and really try and bring her back and bring back some interaction with some of the classmates there in Australia. They're also talking about doing a Zoom session as well.
Yeah, we've got a Zoom session with her class scheduled. So she's going to do a show and tell by Zoom. Sorry for appearing and disappearing. This
you're doing your magic tricks
act. Yeah.
Again.
So, I mean, she's the more deep of the 2 children, and she does say things like, I feel confused about leaving my friends in Australia, but I have family here and I love them. So we do a lot of talking about that, and that's the best way, to get them through.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So moving on, more topics here will be presented by me here, but this is one that I thought Liza would have a great perspective on. So property management. Now we're approaching this differently. So our house in Minneapolis is rented currently. So we're not back in our house, but we had to rent or I should say, we looked at renting the house that we are in fact renting in Brisbane. Turns out, by a stroke of luck, actually, I wish I could claim it was management, but it wasn't, it was just luck, that on the template lease agreement that is provided in Queensland, strangely enough, the property owner allowed for subleasing. But we ran into this rare situation. Maybe you want to talk about the issue that we found trying to rent the place out.
I'm not sure what issue you're referring to. I mean, it didn't work out, but I don't know that that's so unique.
It didn't work out because there's a conundrum where the lease is written in such a way where the property management firm had to know the tenant that was going in, had to take an application on them, which meant that short-term Airbnb was not going to work. So we can get rid of that. Second, using the property management firm to advertise for a tenant for 3 months, not going to work. They've been paid once to find, well, essentially us and run an open house and clean the place and all the rest of it. They're not interested in that. They just said, we will not do that. So what does that mean? How do you advertise a place that you can't get on realestate.com.au and you can't short-term lease? Well, it fell to local Facebook communities. And I don't want to use the word conveniently, but the floods went through Brisbane in late January. And so there were a lot of people, and in fact, there's a desperate shortage of real estate to begin with prior to that. But there was a lot of folks whose homes were being repaired following the floods. So it turned out there was some demand coming from Facebook, but then we really didn't allow enough time, and we probably didn't approach the situation. We would do it differently next time. So we, and I'm not sharing my address or the suburb, but we have an unrented home sitting there in Brisbane right now.
It's rented.
Well,
it's empty.
Unsubleased home and sitting there empty. Okay, so I'm going to just switch gears a little bit here, move on to the more technical topics, the nuts and bolts of how you actually do these things. So running a business in Australia or running a US business from Australia, what are some things, if I could do it all over again, that I would do differently? Well, firstly would be two-factor. All right, I'm going to sign off. We're going to sign off here.
Speaking of those little children, they have a bedtime that I have to keep up on.
Thank you very much, Liza. So two-factor authentication, this is a big deal. When I moved, using a Google Voice VoIP phone was not a problem. And so I could get into all my two-factor authentication apps, which I do for everything anyway, because I take this security very seriously. But midway through, that changed. And so suddenly Google Voice was no longer used by Wells Fargo in particular. And there was someone else, that it might have been Schwab or someone, that wouldn't accept a VoIP for two-factor authentication. So in the case of Wells Fargo, they don't offer an authentication app. So really the only way around that is an RSA device, one of those old school fobs that generates random numbers. That was the way to get around that. Another big challenge is communicating to clients where you're going to be, and to staff. This is a big point right here. So frequent communication with clients. Hopefully there are a number of clients here on the call here tonight. I hope you have felt apprised of my movements, because I've been mindful of that. It did in fact happen today. I was speaking with a client, and she's based in Sydney, and we had some difficulty finding a time, and she was like, "Why are you only available up until about 8 a.m. And I was like, well, that's because it's about 6 p.m. where I am. So we got that straightened out, and we're making it work with finding another time, and also doing video, Loom, not Zoom, Loom videos, just to answer questions. So that's another alternative that's available to help with the face-to-face communication, so to speak. And also using a booking app like Calendly or Acuity. With staff, very important to have staff that are flexible. They're not committed just to bank hours. They're willing to maybe start a bit later and work perhaps a shift after dinner if the situation warrants. And I can certainly thank Amy and Kellen and Jack for their flexibility there. Here's what I would do differently. I did not use what's known as Earth class mail for scanned mail or depositing checks. Instead, I just had them sent to my in-laws. didn't work. Failure on that front. You're looking at about $75 a month for an appropriate plan there with Earth Class Mail, and that's what they'll do. Why didn't it work? It's not because my in-laws threw out my mail. It was more finding a time. It's just a hassle amongst every other challenge of life to say, oh, do you have half an hour so you can open my mail? After a while, it becomes pretty tedious and quite an old request for people. So I'm swapping. I'm now getting mail sent straight to Earth Class Mail just to avoid that altogether. Limited power of attorneys for selling assets. Turned out the biggest challenge that I had was selling my car. Now, we left in the winter of Minnesota in 2021. As it happens, there's a huge shortage of used cars anyway. So who's ever heard of a used car appreciating over time? But that's what ended up happening. And it was very, very, very difficult, in part because of COVID and the altered hours of the DMVs here, as well as trying to sign off with wet signatures from abroad. So it took, in the end, I think that because of differing standards of paperwork and so forth, it was I think I paid $100 to quote unquote courier which is a TNT Express envelope from Brisbane to Minneapolis. And it still ended up taking 10 days because of how crazy it took everything to happen at that point in time. I was previously with a nice office at a place called Industrious. They don't have a presence in Australia. Really, the only game, I won't say the only game in town because there's Regis as well. I just don't prefer that as much. I'm officing presently at WeWork. So that's working extremely well. I'm very, very happy with that. They have, 3 or 4 offices in Brisbane and 3 here in Minneapolis and all over the world. I mean, we're all probably quite familiar with that. Unusually, I am kind of looking and responding or thinking about responding to chats as they come through. Okay. Ron's mentioning that I could have transferred it to a family member. Without taxes. I hadn't heard that one. That didn't come up. Thankfully, my father-in-law is about the handiest guy in the world and the best advocate you could ever ask for. So I'm practically certain that if that was allowed in Minnesota, and Ron, I know that must be tempting. You're probably going to go look me up and find out that it is indeed allowed in Minnesota, but that didn't happen. We ended up selling it, and we've moved on. Okay, so in terms of telephony, boring topic, like I said, nuts and bolts. VoIP. So I've had several clients call and say, I thought you were in Australia. And I said, yes, I am. I'm actually using my VoIP phone. So it presents as a US number, but it works in Australia. And if you want, you can even get an Australian number as well. Why do I advocate this? Because of the points that I'm making down below. I've come to the view that US numbers in particular are basically disposable. And here's why. Because if you're out of the country for more than 3 months, they won't hold your number. So you would otherwise keep having to pay at whatever your bill is, $75 a month or whatever. You could say, you could lower it to 50, I think is perhaps the lowest postpaid plan. But my strategy this time around is don't even give that number out. So it's simply my Google Voice number, which works very well. My computer, my phone will ring in Australia with this one particular phone number, and I've been very pleased with it. It's very reasonable in price. It's $30 a month, and I call internationally to whatever number all the time, and it's just not an issue. As I mentioned, okay, sorry, with Verizon, they only do 3 month suspension, so I'm going to do prepaid. And then downgrade to the lowest plan on the prepaid. It was the postpaid where I was having the problem previously. And then in Australia, they do offer a suspension for a few months. I can't say Australia is necessarily better. It's just that the length of the trip that I'm taking here actually works for what I'm trying to do. So they're happy to suspend it for 3 months. And I'm happy for them to suspend it for 3 months, so I don't have to get a new phone number and tell everyone I've got a new phone number. Foreign exchange and banking tips. Okay, we actually just had a webinar today for the Global Financial Planning Institute on this OFX deal. I'll get to that in a second. So foreign exchange, I've run a webinar on this in the past, like an entire webinar just to do with foreign exchange and how it works and what you need to know. But essentially, it's all about the spread from the interbank rate. That's what it boils down to. That's what you're going to pay. It's not everything. Customer service means something, and different order types also mean something. And that's where OFX come in. Interactive brokers, they're absolutely the lowest cost and do have a number of different order types, but you get what you pay for in terms of customer service, and it can be pretty hard to use. OFX, we have negotiated with the bargaining power that I have with my clients and with the GFP. We've been able to get a rate that's pretty much close to half of the TransferWise spread. So TransferWise is double the cost of what we're able to get for our clients. Ron, I've just got a fanboy there with you today with Google Voice and OFX, so that's great. And in the US, I like and recommend Ally Bank. In Australia, I like Defense Bank. I should mention with all of these things that we have exactly zero commissions coming from any of these things. We're a fee-only advisory firm, so this is literally what I use, what I think is the best. Defense Bank is interesting. Folks might be curious about that because in Australia, there's really an oligopoly with the big four. I went with Defense Bank for the same reason that I like USAA in the US. And I didn't serve in the US military, so therefore I'm not eligible for banking products with them. There's certain other products that the general public can use with USAA, and they're one of the most highly ranked financial services firms around. But it occurred to me that the private banks in Australia, firstly, they're not really doing anything additional with customer service. They've told me directly, and I have clients that are clients of the private banks too, of Commonwealth in particular and ANZ. Essentially, they're concierge bankers. They're helping them get the best deal for what is available at that bank, which is a long way from, I guess, the mystique and the privilege and the different perks that I thought were on offer. Turns out they're not. So I wasn't interested in that. So Defense Bank, the reason I went with that is by virtue of their clientele, they have to work odd hours and they have to work and have to understand how to do business remotely. That's why I went with Defense Bank, and I've been very pleased with them. Very low account keeping, actually no account keeping fees, which is a lot better than ANZ and what I was paying there for many years. Okay, differences in Australian tax. So here are some really the unholy trinity of things we need to know when coming from the US to Australia. We've got higher marginal rates. The marginal rates come in earlier, so they hit you at lower levels of income. You're at 45% at 180,000 Australian dollars. And actually, maybe there's a fourth thing we could add here, but I'll say the third first. No filing status. So for those individuals in a breadwinner type of relationship, you don't have the benefit of that double tax status by virtue of your spouse that might not work outside the home or make nearly as much as what you do. The fourth one is the Aussie dollar, is that 25-30%, depending on the exchange rate at the time, but the difference in what the dollar buys. So the things on a nominal dollar basis cost more, the rates come in lower, they're higher, and there's no tax filing status. So we should be aware of that when planning our tax residency, which we'll talk about in just a moment. So residency, would you believe, and I won't call the person out, but would you believe I was talking about this very topic today for someone who's on our presentation here tonight? And here's the thing. So with residency, there's really three forms of residency that a financial professional could be talking about. There's legal residency. What's your status in country? Are you a citizen, permanent resident, visa holder, et cetera, et cetera? There's legal residency, which is intimately related and connected in the US, not so much on the Australian side, but we'll come to that. There's tax residency. Where are you a primary tax resident? If you are a US citizen, you're always a tax resident of the US, as we all should know by now. I mentioned this in every single presentation. US permanent residents and citizens are always tax residents. So does that mean they pay double tax? No, but it does mean that there's filings and they do need to declare their or at least be assessed for income. Rarely is there double tax owed due to the double taxation treaty between the US and Australia, but funny things can happen. And particularly with the sale of real estate, in particular, where there's a $250,000 to $500,000 capital gain exemption on the US side, but in Australia it's unlimited. So that's a rare circumstance where you can end up paying significant taxes because of the US tie there. But anyway, we're going into way too much detail for where I wanted to take this. Oh, sorry. The third point is estate tax residency. The definition there mostly is to do with your domicile. Where do you see yourself long term? What is it about your fact pattern that proves your intention to remain in a given country? That's what estate tax, that's the definition of residency they use there. So the first question I would ask here is, are you planning on living part-time in either country for the foreseeable future? Practically everyone on the call here tonight would answer yes. That's why I imagine that you've tuned into this. So if that's the case, you're going to be a primary tax resident of one country or the other, because you can only be a primary tax resident in one country at a time. So let me unravel that just a little bit. I just said a minute ago, if you're a US citizen or permanent resident, you're always a US tax resident. But then I said you can only be a primary tax resident of one country at a time. That's correct. So if you were a US citizen who had permanently moved to Australia, you'd purchased a home, started a business, gotten married to a local Aussie, had kids that are enrolled in school, have a dog, registered to vote, the whole thing, then you're absolutely a primary Australian tax resident. If you are on a temporary visa of some kind and you are in Australia for beyond a certain period of time and you've started employment there, again, the facts and circumstances and the definition of your, or sorry, the mere fact of your physical presence speaks to the primary tax residency that you have. However, what about dual citizens or US permanent residents? This is where it gets very interesting indeed. And that is, there's a tiebreaker provision in the tax treaty that deals with such folks who come to Australia, in this case, and maybe have greater connections back to the US. They could say, we own our home back in the US. We have a dog. We live across the street from our in-laws. We have our kids enrolled to attend school on a certain date. We can point literally to specific facts and circumstances and say, that is I have businesses, et cetera, et cetera. And then in Australia, you could say, we're here, we've rented a house, we don't have any, very limited number of financial ties, that we really don't have an established fact pattern. We've got return tickets. The facts clearly support the point of view that this is an extended stay and our primary residence is back there, but it's all about the fact pattern. So what might this offer someone who has a fact pattern that suits? Well, this could present an opportunity for someone to spend extended periods of time beyond the soon to be enacted 45-day physical presence rule in Australia, where you could potentially spend a year or 2 or 3 in Australia if that fact pattern still holds. Now, what might break the fact pattern? Well, what if your spouse goes and applies for permanent residency? What if you extend your trip? That's when the gray, the murkiness comes in, and I think you're inviting the ATO to say, hold on a minute, I think you changed your mind at this point. And so it's just very important to be clear that your facts need to support what residency you're claiming. And I think this is something so important that my Australian tax contact Dylan Goldspring and I were actually seeking a private letter ruling in Australia on exactly this, to be extra sure with the belt and suspenders approach that we like to take. So that's what that slide's all about. Risk management insights. So this is again, nuts and bolts here, no surprises when we talk about health insurance. Australia is much cheaper for healthcare and health services in general, such as counseling, massage, nutritionists. Their hourly rates are just far lower than what you'd pay in the US. Excuse me. So what would you do if you were coming back to the US for a shorter period of time, such as what we're doing? Being a financial planner, being a former professor in risk management, I think it's just tattooed on me somewhere that thou shalt not be uninsured. And that's the advice that I follow. So what we found was that with a few doctors in the family, it's maybe less of a concern for primary care and getting some prescriptions filled. More the concern with me. I'm an avid cyclist. I don't want to have a crash, nasty crash, and be bankrupted by an experience in a US hospital, because strangely enough, that is still one of the leading causes of bankruptcy in the US is uncovered medical bills. So we don't want that to happen. We were referred to, in fact, twice this happened, which is interesting. We were falsely referred to United Healthcare for a short-term policy, but the second question on their application says, have you been out of the country for the last year? And so my philosophy with insurance is never give an insurance company an opportunity to deny you. And so it's important to tell the truth at all times. And so we simply couldn't proceed there. Instead, we're with a company called Loomis, and it's got very generous limits on what it'll cover. But I'm pleased to tell you, I can't report on how the claims process has gone, because thankfully I have not been in hospital in the past month. Now, what about personal items? Let's talk here about the nitty-gritty of what to do with your stuff. So car, I spoke to my agent there in Brisbane, who I recommend, by the way, and he said essentially there's nothing to be done. You can't pause your car insurance. It's just part of the annual policy, so it is what it is. I think it's costing me about $150 a month for that policy. Homeowners, again, nothing to be done, because our possessions that are still in the home still need to be protected. So that's not going away. Where I really did focus my attention, however, was on the higher value items that we brought with us, namely computers, and that includes iPads, laptops, desktops, the whole thing, and bicycles. So 20, yes, it's sad to admit that's my fatal flaw right there. $20,000 in bicycles. Well, I don't want two particularly mobile, easy to steal items like that being uninsured. So it turns out the computers are covered, depending on the computer. The laptop is different to the desktop, but one is covered under the home policy and one is covered under a business policy. So they're fully covered, not worried about other than the potential loss of use, but that's why I have two, is to avoid that situation. So even if one didn't start, I'd still have the other. And the bikes, this was interesting. I came up with a pretty innovative solution here. So I left two of my bikes in Australia. And what was the plan with those? Well, the plan had been to lend it to my brother, my mountain bike to my brother, but then his wife objected because she didn't want him to get injured. So there went that idea. But what I uncovered was something interesting, and that was I couldn't simply say to my brother, hey, borrow this $8,000 mountain bike, and if it gets stolen, hey, no worries. I said, no, add it to your insurance policy at home. And so I spoke with the agent about that, and he said that's not going to work because it's not his property. You can't insure someone else's property under your policy. So we came up with the idea of a bill of sale. And of course, I printed one of my brothers is on is on this webinar, so he'll get a chuckle out of this. But I printed two bills of sale because I wanted to be sure. So there was the bill of sale where I was selling it to him, so it was his now, but he wasn't gonna take possession of the mountain bike without the bill of sale in return. So that way, it came back to me, my property again. That would have passed muster according to my insurance agent. So that was one way to get that covered. But of course, he would have to add it to his policy, and there'd be a premium payable for that. Now, what about back in the US? As I mentioned, we didn't move back into our family home. So what do we do with 20 grand of bikes just lingering around? Turns out State Farm have a policy type known as a personal articles policy. So you can get these bikes insured without homeowners, without renters, it just is insured by itself. And so, and with a $0 deductible. So if they're stolen, it's on the phone to my local agent saying, hey, this is what's happened. So that's what we did with insuring the bikes. Life insurance, I've always been a big fan of US life insurance. It's way cheaper than Australian insurance. I don't know why, but it is. I mean, it's literally a fraction of the cost, assuming you're in a good insurable standard of health. Disability insurance there is a market failure in this area, and I've been working the insurers for years now to try and change this. We thought we were making progress with the Aussie insurers, but then COVID came along and they had their hands full with that. And the US insurers, Mass Mutual, was nearly on board, but then the same thing happened there and they changed their mind. So the problem with disability insurance is this. I wasn't before I was a financial advisor, but I became a big advocate of disability insurance. And for one simple behavioral error that we all make, and that's answered in this way. Do we insure our cars? Yes. Do we insure our houses for things like fire risk? Yes. Yet, the asset worth more, the present value of your future earning income stream, which is likely for folks under the age, I'd say, of 40, 45, is their most valuable asset. Their most valuable asset, which is even more likely to be impaired, is not insured. Well, that just doesn't make sense. That doesn't make any sense. So that's why I'm on about disability insurance. Turns out doesn't travel well. They're worried about insurance fraud, as it turns out, because they can't verify that someone has in fact recovered from overseas. Makes sense. I understand the risk that they're dealing with, but it's something you'd have to get reissued because they will only pay your claim for 6 months before they want to see you in person back in country. So I just kept my US policies in place, knowing full well that I'd have to return to the US. Where can I learn more? We'll go to our website. Up here is the Get Started page. It talks a little bit about the kinds of clients that we work with. If you want some other information, our key financial data sheet is available here. I've also got a slew of blog posts, a whole YouTube channel full of webinars, flow charts, white papers. I'm a big believer in just helping people help themselves. You know, for folks that are time poor, that have got complex situations, we exist to help them. And for other folks that are looking for answers, it's important to make the information available. So that's what we've done there. I'll take questions now. I see there's a couple chats here. Anne says, thanks. Thank you, Anne. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Hi, Jim. Thank you again. Appreciate it. Any other questions? Maybe folks say, hey, what about this? Have you looked at that? Have you thought about this issue or that? Anything of that nature? Text now. Did I ever? So Jack's written in and said, thanks, Ashley, for telephony. Did you ever consider text now? No, I didn't, because I'd never heard of text now. I did look into, oh gosh, what was it? There was one that I was really excited about because it's really next level in terms of technology. Turns out it's next level in terms of price. I'm trying to think of it. It was by the founders of Google Voice. They went on and started their own company, but it was ridiculous. It's like it's going to cost me $180 a month. So that wasn't, and it didn't support Australia, which is actually a common thing for these VoIP companies, which is really strange. And knocked Zoom out, actually. Zoom have got a VoIP solution, but they don't support Australia, which is just bizarre. So no, Jack, I did not, because I had not heard of text now. Sarah, would you recommend outsourcing preparation of your Australian US tax returns to mitigate risk? Well, I guess I do. I guess let me see if Sarah wants to clarify that question, because I don't do my personal taxes. We're not a tax firm. We work with a couple CPA firms that have helped educate on what the issues are that Aussies and Americans in the opposite countries are dealing with. So I don't do them, but I'm very confident in the referral partners that I have. Text Now gives you a US number and SIM card for $8.99 a month. Well, that's a smoking good deal. So I'll have to check that out. Text Now. Okay, Jim, will you keep your Aussie driver's license? And for how long? Yes, I will. And we had it renewed back a year ago. So I believe that's good for 5 years, and it's very helpful to be able in my wallet. Obviously, I won't show it right now, but in my wallet, one behind the other. There's a Minnesota driver's license, there's a Queensland driver's license, and I'm just very slow and intentional about getting behind the wheel back in either country, because you have to remind yourself of what side of the road that you're driving on, and always trying to be safe, of course. Ron, do you pay Medicare levy? That's a great question. Hey, I should have covered that. So no is the answer. And that was a challenge to follow up on, because I left Australia when I was 23. The rule with that, I think, is if you're over the age of 32 or 35, if you don't have private health cover, you'll get hit with this lifetime loading that applies because you didn't take out private health insurance. So I submitted an application to this obscure government department that keeps track of records of movement, and they produce an official statement that says Ashley actually left, and entered on the. It's kind of spooky, actually, because it had this date in early 1982 when I when I first entered the country as a baby, and I didn't know that. I didn't know what that date was until I saw this. But anyway, I submitted that to Medicare, had it notarized or JP'd, and that was not applicable to me. So got rid of that. And I think I'll have to go through the same process again, should I find myself living back here in the US, which is the plan, as you heard at the beginning of the presentation, long term. So the goal will be to avoid that, and deservedly so, because we do have private health insurance when we're in Australia. Gerald, hi Gerald. In California, technically, you should not have both California and Australian drive. Okay, good to know. Thankfully, I'm not in California. Shouldn't say thankfully. I miss many parts of the Bay Area, San Francisco and Berkeley very much, and Palo Alto is a wonderful, wonderful place. But I didn't know that you're not allowed to have both of them. Not sure about other states. I haven't heard anything about that. I was not flirting, with danger there, to my knowledge, or breaking the law, but that is what it is right now. Neil, hi Neil, new to the channel. Have you discussed or plan to discuss how Australian superannuation is viewed or assessed for Australian expats in the US? I have done many webinars on that exact topic, and you need only go to that YouTube channel and you will see information on that, which you can find there. You're welcome. All right, it's been okay. Peter, hi Peter. If you are a US and Australian citizen living in Australia and sell a house in Australia, are you still given the $500,000 house tax forgiveness from the US? Let me just read that again, because I want to be 100% sure. If you are a US and Australian, yes. Living in Australia, yes. And sell a house in Australia, are you still given the $500,000? Yes, you are. That's the short answer. Yes, and I know that for a fact. You are. That's correct. However, that's a problem for some long-term residents whose homes, particularly in Sydney and Melbourne, have appreciated by more than 500,000 US dollars. Diane, hi Diane. Do you know if there is any monitoring of incoming passengers who have a HECS help debt, and if they ever stopped at the border? This is one of those things, I think it's an urban legend, because I've heard the same things just on Facebook groups and random places, but I've never heard of it from a really reliable source. So Diane, I'm going to stick my neck out and say, I don't think it's true. And possibly because what are they going to do? They're going to hold you there for ransom. They're going to say, come up with $30,000 or you're not getting out. I mean, I think it's a story. I haven't heard of it. I know they started requiring Aussies overseas to begin filing returns in order to be able to get their HECS money back, as of, I believe it was 2018-19 that commenced. Maybe it was a year before that. But I don't think so. I don't think so. All right, the pace is slowing down, people. So I'm going to assume all those questions have been asked. We'll be back next month talking about I believe I'll have to double check, but I'm pretty sure we'll be talking about outbound US immigration and tax concerns. So things to know when you're leaving the US to make for a more advantageous financial outcome. That will be coming up in a month's time. And I hope to see you all back then. If you know of anyone I may be of assistance to, or my firm may be of assistance to, please don't be afraid to pass on our information. Thank you so much. I appreciate your attendance and have a wonderful rest of your night.